Welcome to Behind Every Employer, where leaders in business and education from across the country share solutions for sourcing, training, and growing frontline talent to create the workforce of tomorrow. This broadcast is brought to you by the Coalition on Adult Basic Education. To learn more, check us out at www.coabe.org or any of your favorite podcast sites. Now, here are your hosts, Anson Green and Jeffrey Abramowitz. Hello, Anson. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. How about yourself, Jeff?
I'm doing good. So we usually don't date material. We usually don't talk about things that recently happened, but I got to share this. It's National Apprenticeship Week, and you and I did a special podcast celebrating it on Monday. And what a tremendous show. It was a lot of fun and really got to hear about the awesomeness of apprenticeships across the country. So thanks. It was a lot of fun, and I know that we're pushing it out all this week across the country and sharing people. One of the best tools for getting people back into career pathways is using apprenticeships, and probably the most underutilized as well. So how are you?
Absolutely, I'm doing great. Enjoying the fall weather here. I'm rocking my Texas background here because we had such a brutal summer. And now we're in some more pleasant weather, so I had to celebrate here. But yeah, it's been great. And I thought that apprenticeship is such a great model, and I was so glad to get involved with promoting that. And so happy to see, over my career, I've seen apprenticeship really transform, I would say, over the years. And I'm really excited about that. As equally excited as what we're going to talk about today. Yeah. This is going to be a little departure for us on Behind Every Employer, because we're going to talk not about education and training, which is typically what this podcast is about, but about skills-based hiring, which is very related. But this is really going to be about hiring and advancing and finding talent. And in our economic environment, of course, as you know, it's just been really tough since the pandemic. It's just been almost excruciating in certain communities. And so I was really happy to kind of stumble upon this. Actually, I was, talking to one of the individuals on the podcast about doing something on education and training, and we started talking about the skills-based hiring, and I'm like, let's do this episode on that because we need to bring our listeners something different, and it's on the tips of everybody's tongues. And I really think our group from Michigan today has a fantastic model to share with us today. So we're going to be talking about skills-based hiring candidates really on their potential, not on their past experience. And it's honestly, I'll be honest, something I was hearing about on the sides for a while. I was not in that space of hiring like I've been in the past jobs I've had. And so I just kind of was like out of the loop myself until more recently and started, catching up on that. So I thought I'd bring it to the listeners here, and I'm really excited. We're going to be bringing in some of the best from Western Michigan today to talk about this. We've got Chad Patton, the Director of Development at West Michigan Works. You might remember we had a great podcast with Wendy Faub and Kevin Voss from West Michigan just a few episodes ago. So Michigan's just rocking it on the Behind Every Employer podcast. He's going to be joined by Marlene Brostrom, who is the HireReach program manager. You're going to hear about HireReach a lot in this podcast because that's the name of the program that we're going to be talking about with skills-based hiring. And then the rubber meets the road with our employers, of course. And so we've got Kenyatta Brame here, Executive Vice President and Chief Administrative Officer of Cascade Engineering, a customer of this HireReach program, and he's going to really talk about what's behind the magic that's going on over there with HireReach and what they see in it from an employer's perspective that's different and more kind of enhanced from previous hiring practices. So excited to bring this team in and really get the discussion going to hear what's going on out there.
Well, they're all here. The gang is here.
Yeah, the gang's all here. So, Chad and Marlene, I'm gonna begin with you, and kind of set the table for us about Michigan, West Michigan Works, and your roles there, and kind of give us some backdrop for our listeners out there about what you do up there in West Michigan.
Yeah, I'm happy to start us off. I'm Chad Patton, Director of Development and Innovation for West Michigan Works, and West Michigan Works is the operations of the Workforce Development Board for what we call Prosperity Region 4B in Michigan. So there are 16 Michigan Works agencies, and we're proud to be one of them. And our region covers 7 counties. So that's going to include the counties of Allegan, Barry, Ionia, Kent, Montcalm, Muskegon, and Ottawa. Took me a moment to learn those so I could rattle them off that quickly.
Very good. You're going to get extra credit there with your leadership.
So, one of the things that I'll mention about West Michigan Works before I pass it off to Marlene is that we consider ourselves to be a solutions-driven system. So that means that we aim to understand the needs of our employer partners as well as our job seekers who come into our service centers, and then provide solutions, right? So oftentimes what you might typically see is that's finding, helping to get jobs and connect job seekers with jobs, and then helping employers connect with job seekers as well. But what you're going to find today is that we are engaged in a lot of innovative activities and hiring.
Yeah. Well, let's hear about it. Marlene, tell us about what you're doing up there in West Michigan and West Michigan Works, and let us get introduced a little bit to HireReach, because I really drill down into this.
Sure. No, thanks for having us. So I'm a project manager at West Michigan Works, and I've been with the entity for 13 plus years. And, if you think about Michigan Works, we serve employers and we serve job seekers. And I've always served on the employer side, which is fascinating. Apprenticeships, manufacturing council, things of that nature. So as Chad mentioned, We're always thinking about what are the solutions for the employers, right? Just as we're working with job seekers, what are they seeing? How do we help and serve the employers? So it was maybe 10 plus years ago. Some of our subcontracts, some of this work was done with a major healthcare entity in West Michigan about how do we do hiring better. And they worked with an engineer and tried to look at how do we bring some of the manufacturing principles that are very prevalent, continuous improvement, lean, talent supply chain management, and apply that to the hiring space. So they piloted this way of thinking called evidence-based selection over 10 years ago, had tremendous success with it. And thankfully, our region, we like to think, like Chad mentioned, we're pretty innovative. We're fortunate that we have an entity and a board and a bunch of private funders that support different types of work. And so they came to West Michigan Works and said, we're really fascinated with this project. If we give you some funding, could you see if you could put together a program and try and replicate it with a group of employers, right? We really want to hone in on, was this something employer specific, a secret sauce, or is this something that we could apply to our employers in West Michigan and really see if we can make an impact?
Fantastic. Well, I like how this is sounding already. And I really love this idea. I mean, we've all been through the hiring process. We have jobs, right? But a lot of times when you're on the, depending on what side of the table you're on, you kind of feel like there's a lot more art than science to the job interview. And sometimes the art is full of bias. Let's just put it out there. And one of the things that really spoke to me was this evidence-based model, and really providing a more objective candidate selection process. And I was, listening to some of the videos that you guys have on HireReach, and I just loved, that approach to, I mean, you were giving examples of people making decisions on hiring based on what university somebody went to and things like that. Like, we know this stuff happens. We've been in those meetings on either side of the table. And so I think you bring some great value. Plus, I see it as a huge kind of a huge advance in terms of helping us identify people that maybe in that standard interview model don't rise to the top because of bias or because of other factors when they may in fact be the best candidate. So I just love that about it. The first thing, now Chad had me nervous when he began because he was starting to talk about, and of course I pulled him into it on purpose, but he was talking about the workforce areas and these regions and the counties and all this stuff. And I thought, sounds like state bureaucracy. And having worked in a state bureaucracy for 14 years in a workforce agency, I know exactly what he's talking about. But one thing I wanted to ask Chad, you and Marlene about is, HireReach does not at all look like anything that comes out of a state government or a federal funded program. And in fact, prepping for this podcast, I had to go root around to make sure that this was actually a public workforce system organization, because I can tell you, in Texas here, we pride ourselves on being employer responsive and all of that. But by golly, I worked there for 14 years in the workforce agency. It still feels very bureaucratic to our employers. You guys have just totally taken that sheen off of it and put something completely new on top that I think is attractive. What's the story there? Because maybe others listening need to take that little lesson learned about what you guys were trying to accomplish, which I think is somewhat obvious, but tell us about it. And then kind of how has it been working for you?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk a little bit through that. So
yeah.
We look at being the public workforce system definitely as a strength of ours, right?
Yeah.
And so that being in tune with our clients, if you will, both job seekers and employers, we really do have that understanding of what's necessary and what's needed out there. So taking that solutions driven approach, that really put us in a position where it made sense for us to start looking at how we can remove bias from the selection process.
Sure.
So, without getting too technical of how we've sort of done things, we really focused on our region in implementing HireReach within the first 3 years. And that was a good opportunity to pilot this project. We definitely had made a lot of process improvements to it, really drastic, that Marlene might go into later.
Yeah.
And by the end of the 3-year piloting process, what we ended up doing was we created a separate 501c3 for a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
One is actually somewhat connected to the role that I have, which is development and innovation. It's, I have a lot of projects that could be brought to scale, HireReach being one of them. Right. And so we definitely have seen that we have a number of innovations that we believe need to be brought outside of our 7-county footprint, not just to Michigan, but potentially nationally, because they're hot topics and they're, needs that need solutions. And we see skills-based hiring as a hot topic. People are talking about it nationally. And so this nonprofit called Strategic Workforce Solution actually uses employees from our public workforce system at West Michigan Works. We are able to carry over their expertise in order to implement our innovative projects outside of our public workforce system, which of course, we have federal, state grants. We very much like to maintain that, what we call quasi-governmental status. Yeah. But Strategic Workforce Solutions lets us break out of that and bring these innovations to a larger scale.
So you can speed things to market. You can reach across the aisle to your traditional public system, to connect to education and training resources and things like that. But you maintain the nimbleness and kind of the ability to have a flexible business model. I mean, anyone that's worked in state or federally funded programs know that there's just some things you're not getting around in terms of bureaucracies. So you guys, I just love that approach. Great lesson there. I've heard of this before with public workforce systems, but never as acutely kind of focused on a specific topic here, skills-based hiring. So I really love that, really kind of sharpened approach to that. And the website looks great and all of that. I mean, it really just is attractive to our business partners out there for sure. All right, so let's move on here. I'm going to switch over to Marlene because she just loves this topic of skills-based hiring. When it seems like Chad just backs up when we start talking about this every time, and she gets this glow around her and a glint in her eye. So I want you to help our listeners out here, Marlene. And first off, let's start from the beginning. Like, define for us skills-based hiring and how is it different from traditional approaches to hiring that all of us are used to, that we've seen in business and in public service?
Yeah, and I should preface it. Well, I get really excited about this. If I go on too long, Anson, you just feel free to cut me off. So
I will. Jeff will hit mute. Yeah, he's got it.
Okay, perfect. Well, I think you brought up a good point. Skills-based hiring has different definitions, right? We've heard a couple of different interpretations. At the very simplest form, we say instead of using credentials, education, experience as a proxy for someone's ability to succeed or perform in a job, we're really honing in on skills. And we say those could both be occupational and then foundational. So at its very core, that's how we define it. If I really oversimplify skills-based hiring, I think what's fascinating to me is the market has kind of forced employers to look at this. So this topic has been all over. It's not new. You can go on LinkedIn, you can go on SHRM's website, and there's something about skills-based hiring.
Sure.
While it seems to make sense and it seems really simple, it's very complicated to execute when you start getting into competencies and hiring processes and biases. I think what we see is that unfortunately, HR teams, right, have gone through a major transition before COVID, even during COVID, where the market looks different. So maybe 20 years ago, they had their pick of the market. The baby boomers, women were entering the workforce, and they could have their picks, right? I remember when I started at Michigan Works, we would have lines around the door for job fairs. Yeah. That's not the case anymore. So the other thing we try to look at is how do we equip HR teams to make decisions? In any other role in an organization, if you are in manufacturing, you are looking at your supplier, your quality, your parts. But in HR, we've just expected HR teams to go, look at that resume, even though everyone does a resume different. Yeah. And sit with them for an hour, and you should make a decision out of the 5 people who you think is going to be best fit for the job. So, and then you start to see other people being brought in because everyone's nervous to make the decision. So really, we like to look at it, a good analogy is Moneyball. If you haven't seen the movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt, but it's really trying to say, how do we apply the science, this data, to really do a better job at predicting who we think is going to be a good fit for our organization. And there's a whole body of research that studies this. So we try to hone into the research. HireReach particularly looks at, we understand the theory, employers buy into this topic. It's just really hard to execute. And how do we do it in a way that's not overwhelming and take years for employers to execute?
I love this. So, we all getting, if you've been a hiring manager, you get to this point with your candidates and, you're pulling out your divining rod, trying to pick the right one. And, you're hoping a unicorn will fly by and all these different things. But, you really get kind of vulnerable in that moment because you're really trying to make a big decision, fill a critical position. And you realize how little you have to go on. The resume is, completely a form of art that, is some representation of the individual's, potential. The interview is another art form, there's all these unique aspects. Objectivity is really kind of hidden in there. So you guys are really bringing this aspect of objectivity, clearing out these biases and these things that kind of clutter the decision-making process maybe. And so I really see that as a powerful way to kind of help kind of streamline that hiring process and take, backfill a lot of that guessing with evidence. And I think it's interesting, we have kind of a similar theme happening in education and training. We've heard it on the news. We've maybe lived it ourselves and seen it where, all of a sudden degrees and credentials in the past were like the entry point, the thing you had to have, the gatekeeper for employment, for advancement, and all these other things. And you see the colleges now with big businesses saying, we're going to remove all our degrees at certain job categories. State government's doing the same thing, which just a few years ago would have been heresy, to take the BA degree requirement out of managers' jobs or something. And so I really love, we see this deconstruction, because it's really throwing, I've got a lot of, friends that work in education and higher ed, and they're just like, oh my God, people don't care about degrees as much anymore. What are we going to do? It's our stock and trade. So I really see this interesting theme, and the technologies are also giving us the evidence that we need. That's the other thing that was kind of elusive is now you can get stuff and so much great data at your fingertips so much more quickly. So we're really seeing the system kind of go through kind of a transformation. And I just love that. So tell me a little bit, I want to hear a little bit about how does it support, let's turn to the job seekers. So, we're all in the business of working with job seekers that sometimes are looking for a big break in their lives, building skills and, other types of things that have kept them from their career dreams. How do you see skills-based hiring helping the job seeker?
Yeah, so this is where, it's interesting, right? This program started off with, let's help employers, let's support employers.
Yeah.
But really, I feel like it levels the playing field for job seekers. So I think, for historically, career decisions, hiring decisions are based, like we said, on where you went to school, your background, your education. So if you didn't have those same opportunities, what people are judging you on in the interview process, so you might be at a disadvantage. I think the other thing is we're trying to work at, as a Michigan Work standpoint, how do we give job seekers the same access to information about themselves and their skills, not just their occupational skills, but foundational skills? What are your career interests? And I often reflect at, many of us in the professional setting, we have access to leadership training, DISH training, personality assessments, team building, but most often, like those entry-level workers, they don't ever they oftentimes don't get invested in, right? Or they don't have the opportunity to learn about themselves and where do you fit as a career and where are you going to thrive? So I feel like this whole model of skills-based hiring is hopefully leveling the playing field.
Yeah.
And then letting individuals really understand what their skills are so they can advocate to the employer for themselves.
Absolutely. And you said something I want to you said it twice. I want to make sure our listeners understand it. And it's this foundational skills. Tell us a little bit about that. What are we talking about there? Reading, writing, math, English, other things? Tell me about this.
So I won't go into the technical definition, but if we say there's competencies or skills, I think of them as two buckets. Occupational skills. How to weld, how to type. There's things to be able to do your job. There's these foundational skills, which some people call them soft skills. I'm not a fan of that term, but soft skills. So the easiest way we look at it is to say the occupational competencies allow you to do your job. The foundational competencies allow you to do your job well. So think of someone that's got problem solving, communication skills. And I always look at it to go, employers are fantastic about screening for occupational competencies, right? It's pretty easy to know how to assess a welder if you need a welder.
Yeah. Sure.
But the difference between the high performers and the average performers are those foundational competencies. And there's money attached to that. So if you can really hone in on someone's foundational competencies, it can have a significant ROI for productivity in your workforce.
Right. I used to have a boss years ago. He would say, the soft skills are really the hard skills because they're the ones that are going to get you fired if you don't have them, So this is really, really insightful. So I got one last question, and then I want to bring in Kenyatta to hear about how this is helping Cascade. But tell us, Marlene, practically, describe for our listeners, how does a business participate? You've got thousands of businesses out there, and I'm sure there's some process for kind of getting involved. And then once you get involved, what is the process forward? And you just real briefly here, kind of tell us how that works, because sometimes I think this is such a great idea. Everyone's signing up. How can you manage that?
Sure. Yeah, and I would say even though we say, there's so much work to be done in this HR space, employers are fantastic, right? So I feel like every employer that's engaged with HireReach are what we call like the strivers. They're these companies that say, we want to be in the cutting edge. We care about employees. We want to do better. And I think, we don't have it 100% figured out, right? We're always continuously improving and listening to the organizations we've worked with. And we've since worked with, I think, close to 50 organizations. So we focused on the science of evidence-based selection or skills-based hiring. But over our first year or two, listening to our organizations that have participated to say, how do we make a model that addresses some of the obstacles and barriers to implementing skills-based hiring? I often use the analogy like weight loss. It's really easy to say, I buy into it, I want to do it. But when the rubber hits the road, it's really hard to track your food and work out. So we've come up with a model. We have since streamlined it. It's a 5-month program. Employers sign up. They assemble a project team. We take them through some learning, some one-on-one consulting, and then some cohort learning. So the intent would be, we're going to teach you about skills, give you the tools that you need to collect the evidence. We're going to work with you one-on-one, recognizing that each employer has different hiring practices, different candidate populations, and then we share best practices. So we work with the organizations for about 5 months, and then after that, we'll do some implementation support periodically throughout there.
I love it. So part of the winnowing process, if for lack of a better word, is that the employers aren't passive recipients here. They've got to get involved, dedicate time. Do they need to have like certain types of data available, or do they have to go in and revise their job descriptions? Like, what does that internal process for the business look like?
Yeah, and that's interesting. So it really depends. So I would say we have core concepts that science and research tells us it makes an effective skills-based hiring process, but every organization comes at a different standpoint. So when we meet with an organization and they're interested, we kind of go through like this employer readiness to say, where are you at? What's your appetite for change and what the organization wants to take on and where you want to go? And we talk through a solution. Some organizations aren't even tracking, talent acquisition key performance indicators. Some of them are really robust in the running processes. So what we try to say to the organization is, if you want to make the effort and move forward, we will work at your pace. And let's make sure, again, this can seem overwhelming. Let's take baby steps here. Let's take baby steps and work. Some progress is better than none.
Sure, absolutely. Very, very good. Very good. Okay, let's bring in Kenyatta here. I'm really eager to hear this from the Cascade perspective. And Kenyatta, welcome. Thank you for jumping in here, because I really think this is where we're going to hear the evidence of what this looks like for Cascade. So tell our listeners a little bit about Cascade Engineering. What do you guys do, and what is your role there at Cascade?
So good evening, everyone. My name is Kenyatta Brame, and we are a manufacturer. We do large injection molding, and we're in many different markets. So we're in markets of solid waste, automotive, and furniture. We're an organization that has been around for 50 years, and we pride ourselves on being a triple bottom line organization, meaning that when we make decisions, we think about the three different capitals: people, planet, and profit. And this is really, this work we've been talking about, the HireReach work, really falls into the people category.
Yeah. Fantastic. I love this. And being in plastic injection molding and manufacturing in that region you're in, which I'm familiar with, you've got a lot of competition up there for talent. I work in manufacturing too, and definitely I think, differentiating your abilities in different ways to attract yourself to job seekers is critical. And it's really encouraging to see that you guys have gone through this skills-based hiring approach. I want you to talk about your perspective on the value that you see in this process, and maybe do so in how it's different from what you guys were doing in the past.
So we at Cascade Engineering understand that right now in Michigan and throughout the United States, we're in a battle for talent.
Yeah.
And we got to figure out a non-violent way to say that. But what we understand that the markets are very different. And I think Marlene hit it right. The baby boomer generation, where we had 100 applicants for every job, those days are over. And so we need to better understand right now the desires of our applicant pool, of the talent pool. So we want to make sure that we are offering jobs and opportunities that they want. And we're finding that employees want to have careers, not just jobs. And so we have to make sure that we're providing that. As an organization, we realize that that there are many barriers to employment, and we've got plans and policies and programs to help face some of those barriers. A barrier could be reentry. So we've got plans that helping people with criminal backgrounds finding job. For many employers, that's a place where they eliminate people. We haven't done that. We tried to expand our pool. We've got a welfare to career program where we help people that coming out of poverty find employment and help them break down that barrier. We have an anti-racism program where we're trying to make sure that race is not a factor. And these are many barriers that employees face. And this HireReach expands that work. We talked about, a person may get chosen because I'm a University of Michigan grad, and people might like me because I'm from Michigan, go blue. But that doesn't mean that I'm the best qualified person for that position. And that's a barrier for people. And what evidence-based hiring does is that, I think Marlene said it levels the field, but it also expands the field. There may have been people that we would not have selected in the past because we looked at their school or looked at their status or looked at a billion different things and eliminated them from the pool. And this program allows us to go deeper, widen our employment applicant pool and find candidates that we need. We're in the process right now of, we have to think about our future. And we have to make sure that we have the talent now that's going to make us successful in the future. And this program has been successful in helping us do that.
Right. Oh, I love this. And also, being in manufacturing, I live this every day too. Your processes and your production environments are becoming so much more, they're evolving so quickly with automation and all kinds of advances. So, even the job descriptions and the model that you used to hire a year ago might be out of date now. It's that situation too. We just had on a great guest from Kawasaki in Lincoln, Nebraska, one of our previous episodes, and he, Kawasaki, they hire several thousand people in a massive plant there in Lincoln, Nebraska. And, talking about just of course, the immigrant and refugee populations that are really the future workforce in many communities. In Texas, for sure, been living that for decades now, where our net growth in our workforce is immigrant populations. So that also has you having to really redesign your employment models to really think about how do we operate with these different populations and still be cutting edge with the technologies and automation. And that's what I do in my daily job. And so I think the thing I haven't thought enough about myself, you guys are thinking about it and doing it, is really like, how does the hiring process, not the training process, but the hiring process need to advance? So I'm really, really encouraged to hear you say that. And you guys are probably in full employment up there, right, Chad? I mean, there's probably 1.5 people for every position out there, right?
So the concept of a person coming to a manufacturing job and pulling a lever as their job, those days are over. So these individuals, you talked about AI, we're moving to more, in reality, because in Michigan, our population isn't growing, that even makes AI and automation more important, right? Yeah. So the people that will remain in manufacturing have to have the ability to work with automation, understand computers. So they might be on the press, and they might have to fix the press. And so this is why we need to make sure that in our hiring process, we understand what their skill sets are and understand what their future abilities are. One thing about this program is that we're not saying that you have to have it, but you have to be able to be trained for it. You have to be able to grow, and we want people to grow with us as an organization.
Yeah, you guys are. With technology and it also, it's doing two things to me too. It's changing how we all have to think about those jobs. Like you said, it's not just pulling the lever. Now these are high tech jobs. And that's a different way to market your jobs. The public is not thinking that. When they say manufacturing, they're thinking gears and grease.
Yes.
It's not that way at all. And so there's this branding aspect that I think is very critical. And it's one also that I think really challenges us to think about how do we push that into the job seeker's eye and make parents that have their kids going through school think of these jobs completely differently. We're talking about generational changes here sometimes to kind of get those thoughts across into people's minds. And so I'm really excited to kind of hear that is happening out there for you guys in such a great way. So I got one last question for you. And I want you to think if you can give us a great example of maybe an individual or someone that you guys have hired through this process, where maybe this might not have been the candidate that made it through in your traditional process, or maybe you found somebody quicker than you might have because of the HireReach model in this skills-based hiring. Do you have an example like that on the tip of your tongue?
So, when we were looking at originally, when we were hiring entry-level people, we probably had one position in mind, right? So they were going to go and be an entry-level operator. Through this process, we've been able to identify different skill sets, right? And so we may have discovered that this person could have been an excellent operator, but they have other abilities and they can now be a tech one or a die setter or material handler. And so through the process, we're able to learn about these different skill sets. And so their career path changed and they're able to reach higher levels in the organization quicker because we're already able to establish that they brought some skill sets with them.
Oh man, I love that. One of my favorite topics, a lot of people know this, is skilled immigrants. All the college trained immigrants that may have weak English, and so we think, oh, low skilled, but in fact they're engineers. And we probably want to hire those people because they probably speak the language of half the people in our organization sometimes. So you have a bilingual, biculturally savvy engineer on staff, but that's that hidden talent that a normal process is going to screen out and put them into an English class or something. So really excited about that. I mean, so we see these advances happening in the hiring process in the production world. The future. I mean, you guys are essentially an automation company that's in the business of plastic injection molding now. You've kind of turned it on its head. But that means you have to really think about your candidates and how you get those candidates differently. So I want to bring Chad and Marlene back and ask you guys if you have any insights on what are next steps for you guys in skills-based hiring in terms of fine-tuning and scaling a model like this, because it just seems like it holds so much potential for your community.
Yeah, and I would say I look at that twofold, right? As one, we always have opportunity to do continuous improvements to our program. And one of the things we're realizing is organizations have this change management, right? Changing the way an organization brings in talent is very personal, right? You're bringing someone on your team to be your coworker. So we've tried to build in some additional supports in our program to make our program better to help the organizations.
Sure.
I think where we see some interest in the market, and I can't recall who said it earlier, but this fact of retention, right? People, I think it was you, Kenyatta, right? They don't just want a job, they want a career. And that's often more important than money. So we want to go, how do we use the same framework for skills-based hiring to support organizations and going, great, you brought them in. How do you help career path them? And then from a workforce development standpoint, we're kind of piloting the sister project that uses the same framework to say, all right, how do we provide these, assessments and framework to individuals to help them understand so that they can navigate effectively to the right job? So many times people are just applying to anything here and there that they think is within their reach. And it might not be a job that they're going to be a good fit for or that they're even going to thrive in. So we want to, I guess, make these career decisions a little bit more accurate.
Right. Oh, I love it. Chad, you wanted to chime in?
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit to that. And kind of piggybacking off of Marlene too, I kind of put two camps of scaling, right? There's one camp of we obviously want to get HireReach in the hands of more employers throughout Michigan and throughout our nation, right? So that's one element of scale that we are working on. The second, though, is exactly what Marlene was talking about. We are providing evidence-based resources to employers to make evidence-based decisions. So what happens if we provide that same evidence, that same data to the job seekers themselves? And that's the project that Marlene's talking about that we are piloting. In fact, we piloted it over 3 years with a company called Trinity Health, and the project was Rise Up. And it took this model that came out of Cleveland Clinic that said, what does it look like to really focus on getting individuals, getting job seekers from outside of an organization in? So it's an outside in and inside up framework.
Sure.
And then the inside up is putting resources, and I know that this podcast focuses on basic skills. So if we're looking at basic skills, right, how are we training in basic skills and beyond to get people into an employer and then invest in them so that they can be successful, retain, and move up within that employer's organization?
Fantastic. Yeah, you were channeling me there, because I kept thinking, the whole time you're working through this process with your employers, you're getting really good data that is going to inform your training programs, your workforce development programs, your basic education programs. You're really building a bench of knowledge and skills on your labor market, as well as your employer, kind of the nuances of employer demand that you just don't get at all in a traditional hiring approach at all. It's just like elusive. This is fantastic. We are going to, we could talk all night on this thing because I'm getting really excited about this and want to learn more, but we have got to break away and do our lightning round here. So this is where we're going to come back and each of you give our listeners one thing that can go back and do based on our conversation about skills-based hiring, whether, tell an employer about something or do something within your own organization. So think about that and we'll be right back. Jeff, take us out.
You've been listening to Behind Every Employer with Anson Green and Jeffrey Abramowitz. It's one thing to talk the talk, but in the lightning round, which is coming up, we walk the walk with action steps. You can listen to Behind Every Employer podcast on YouTube, Spotify, or find us on your favorite podcast venue.
Okay, we're back. All right, I'm gonna pick on people here and go around so we can go through this here because we're running long here. Chad, I'm gonna go with you. One thing that you want our listeners to take away from this conversation today.
One thing, I'm gonna let Marlene pitch HireReach, and so my one thing is connect with your local workforce development board. That's my big pitch here. We are here to support both job seekers and businesses and employers alike. So
I love that one. I would say, and this is going to be mine, I was going to say too, not all workforce boards are created equal, and you guys are definitely with HireReach reaching out there into kind of like the high level of advancement, but all of them have some sort of business service unit, and I used to work in one. I worked at one at the state and the local level. So my recommendation is, if you're an employer out there, because a lot of times our workforce systems are seen as the unemployment office, but within those systems are business service individuals whose job, my job when I woke up in the morning was to serve businesses. It wasn't to schlep job seekers, into jobs or anything like that. It was to serve businesses, and they exist out there. So I will second Chad's call to action and say, dig deep into those organizations in your communities, the American Job Centers. They may go by that in your community, and look for the business service units or business service representative units. Those are going to be the folks that will be speaking to you if you're a business owner or business working business. So Marlene, all right, you got the star action here with HireReach. So charge our listeners with something there. Chad was so kind and holding that off for you.
Yeah, I would say, if I had to give advice to an employer is to start somewhere, just start, right? I think that's first and foremost. And I think a good place to start, and here's my plug for HireReach, is we do have, we published a guidebook, right? It's kind of a to Z on everything related to evidence-based selection, things you should consider, a framework in the model, and that is available for free on our website. So it's
tell us where we can get that. Where can we get this on the website, West Michigan Works, or the HireReach website?
It would be HireReach. So it would be www.hirereach.org.
Perfect. Easy. All right. I love that. The guidebook. Let's go check that thing out, Jeff. Kenyatta, I'm turning over to you now. As the business representative on the call here, what's one thing you want to charge our listeners with, please?
I would charge every employer to, first of all, make sure they understand their why. Why should an employee want to work for you? At the same time, I challenge us to make sure we understand if there are barriers that are preventing them from working with you, how can you address them? One of the great ways that you can address a barrier in hiring is using a program like HireReach to make sure that we have equity and equality through our process. So I challenge every employer to look at themselves to make sure we're doing the right thing for our communities and for your business.
Oh, yeah. And you mentioned the triple bottom line earlier. So I love that. And a great signpost there for our employer listeners out there. And Jeff, I'm going to swing around to you here to close us out.
Yeah. So I've been sitting here taking notes.
You have. I saw the pen, man.
Because I've done a lot of work in the workforce development field, and you've all struck a number of chords. But for me, the takeaway was that, and I think a few of you mentioned it, it's really about skills-based hiring is looking at helping people understand how to do the job. But the most important piece is how to keep the job, that retention piece, and really getting people to understand the value that they bring into the workforce, and knowing that oftentimes it's not just about that skill set, it's about those essential skills, I call them, because there's nothing soft or easy about them. They're essential skills in life. So great discussion. It was awesome. And I think this is definitely a model that other states should be looking at and following, and definitely want to check out the HireReach handbook that's out there.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank everybody for your time today, and our listeners out there, please like us, subscribe, leave us a comment, give us a 5-star review, and check us out at behindeveryemployer.org. Jeff, take us out for another great episode.
Take care, everybody. You've been listening to Behind Every Employer with Anson Green and Jeffrey Abramowitz. If you like the show, please follow us and tell your friends and colleagues. This broadcast has been brought to you by the Coalition on Adult Basic Education. You can find us at www.coabe.org. You can listen to us on Spotify, YouTube, or on your favorite podcast site. If you'd like to be a guest on Behind Every Employer, please contact us at behindeveryemployer@coabe.org.